All right. Three things you need to know about communication issues in your relationship. The first thing is that whatever the problems that you're having with him when you're trying to be seen, heard, understood, aren't the real problems. And I'm not saying they're not a problem in your life or they haven't caused you a lot of suffering over the years. What I mean is they are symptoms of a deeper problem. And that deeper problem is going to be wounding and patterns that exist in both of you and have existed in both of you since before you even met each other. It just so happens that when you did meet, your subconscious and his subconscious recognized things in each other that was like, this is the perfect person to play out this, whatever that pattern is for you, almost always from childhood, in order for it to be healed. And that is one of the beautiful purposes of relationship. And one of the most frustrating things for many of you, at least at first, is that it taps right into that. The second thing is that these patterns exist mostly in your body, not so much as thoughts and thinking patterns in your brain. That's the mistake that many people make and why they find themselves stuck in talk therapy for years and years and years, making very little progress. They might feel better, but when they look at the external circumstances of their life and relationships, not much often changes, sometimes, but not always. And the reason is because you can look at these patterns and you can analyze them and you can recognize, yes, when I was 7 and my mother said this thing to me or my dad, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, great. Now what? And it's because you're just looking at it from a sort of external perspective. But when you look at how these patterns show up, particularly in communication, so you're going to have that conversation with him and it just leads to that same old fight that brings up this same triggered feelings in him and then in you, or you go to share something and you're and just as I say that, your throat tightens up and you can't speak or whatever it is. If you notice, whatever those challenges are that you're facing, they're really a bodily experience, aren't they? Or maybe you go to whenever you speak about a specific subject, you just get full of adrenaline and you raise your voice and you can't help but do that. This is a bodily experience. And the third thing is that it is mostly these energies that he is responding to. That is why when you try to say things differently, or you try to use a different tone, or you try to change the way you say it, or the timing of when you bring the thing up, and all these things, or you try these various communication techniques that they're good, but the reason they don't work is because it's really the energy that he is responding to. But the good news is this is that when you attend to these parts of yourself, when you tend to these energies, these patterns in the body, and doing so just for yourself and totally separate from him, is that you change the energy that he's responding to. So that, that corresponding pattern that fits just so perfectly with his pattern isn't there anymore. So now you can expect a completely different result. So now the communication skills that, we teach that stuff too. Now, when you go to use those, the language patterns and all of these things, now it can work because the energy from which it is coming from has changed. And the beautiful thing is, it only takes sort of relatively small changes on the internal level, on the level of the pattern, to create relatively big changes in the external, and which is why you can expect to see a completely different response from him when you work on it from this perspective. So I hope that was helpful and explains why maybe some of the things that you've tried up till now haven't worked. And I also hope that this gives you some hope and inspiration for what is possible for you in your relationship. All right, take care.